गुड आफ्टरनून।
हाँ डॉक्टर शाहिर, गुड आफ्टरनून। कैसे हैं?
हाँ, मैं ठीक हूँ सर।
ओके। और अभी कैसा चल रहा है बेंगलोर में?
It's awesome sir,
अच्छा, ओके
including job wise and weather
ओके
wise and everything. So it's a fantastic place actually.
ओके। बट आर यू गेटिंग द एक्सपोजर ऑफ द पेशेंट?
No sir, only virtual exposures I'm getting. But there is just so much to do that feels like I would never like even get time if I try to. There's just like this is. It's like a tip of an iceberg of what I'm doing, and what more is to be done, and it's just overwhelming. So I was kind of for now content to leverage my existing knowledge towards solving some of those problems.
ओके, सो वी लिसन टू योर एक्सपीरियंस टुडे इन दिस इम्पैक्ट लेक्चर। तो अभी हम लोग 2:30 पे स्टार्ट करते हैं बस।
जी सर।
ओके। Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Jodhpur, we welcome you all for this impact lecture, which is being in association with the Ministry of Education's Innovation Cell, All India Council for Technical Education, Ministry of Education, and Institute Innovation Council, the 4.0, which of which the AIIMS Jodhpur is also a part. We have started the Impact Lecture Series 22-23, and the first session is being conducted today. So, as part of the sessions, two lectures to be delivered. First lecture was in the morning on the intellectual property right, and this is a second lecture, which is on the doctors being the innovators and what is their experience. So these are the expert sessions which are being delivered by experts in order to impact innovations in the education institute. AIIMS Jodhpur, being a part of the Institute Innovation Council, has also, apart from this, ISC has a medtech program as well. So we are in a position to deliver best for the healthcare area. Although this innovation cell is not only targeted for the healthcare, but in many other areas. So most of the technological institutes are conducting these sessions as part of this impact lecture series. So today I welcome you all, and we are having Dr. Shahir from Bangalore as an expert. He is a clinician. So I request Dr. Shival Srivastav to please introduce Dr. Shahir.
Uh, Thank you, sir. Good afternoon to all. It is a pleasure to introduce Dr. Shahir to all of you. Dr. Shahir has done his MBBS from Bangalore Medical College and Research Institute, followed by MD from Ajmer. Briefly, he also worked at CMC Vellore for 2 years and KIMS Mangalore for a year. Followed by his stint at these two centers, he proceeded to do DM in Pulmonary Medicine from our institute, AIIMS Jodhpur. And I remember reading his papers about COVID forecasting and endobronchial biopsy on ResearchGate and found them to be very interesting. And currently, Dr. Shahir is working on algorithms to predict diseases of the heart using ECGs. And they is also working in areas of echocardiography, electronic health records, CT images, and pathology slides. So I request Dr. Shahir to please deliver your talk. Over to you, Dr. Shahir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kuldeep sir, and thank you, Dr. Shival. First of all, I would want to thank the AIIMS administration for inviting me for this talk. And yeah, I'll straight away dive in. So, there was a pattern to the journey that I made. So, currently, from clinical point of profession to a totally tech-based enterprise that I'm running with others. So, yeah, so it all started with my undergraduation, and that's why I'm very happy that AIIMS Jodhpur is conducting these kind of outreach to the industry. Because while I was at Bangalore Medical College, and it was then for sure, it was called the Silicon Valley of India, Bangalore. So we had a lot of interaction with the industry then, and I knew it fairly early that tech was going to be one of the major disruptors. And then while I was working at CMC Vellore, that was the time for the first time I had actual access to the EHR, what we call the electronic health records. And to be honest, they probably have, because that EHR had been developed in house and they had a culture of excellence in that. They won various awards for that EHR. And that was the time I actually saw how digitized healthcare actually looks like. And it was so strong that, in fact, you would feel powerless if you for some reason lose access to the EHR, you almost feel. But at the same time, it was so ubiquitous that you could like monitor, track, look at all previous records. You can be in any part of the hospital. You can access patients' data, and I could see that the power that digitization was affecting. We had all patient inpatient histories online. You could read when the patient was previously admitted, which OPD departments patient went to, what was the who ordered which test, and so most of those things were very easily accessible. So I could see the power, but also there were some limitations that I observed with that. For example, despite that level of digitization, we still had to sometimes uh, wait for a call from the from the department to say that the patient's potassium levels is like too high. You got to do something about it. Or we detected mucor in their bowel sample. So if you've sent the patient away, please call the patient. So these kind of alerts used to come manually. So even at that time, I had felt that this was probably something that that could be automated and might actually help. And then while I was working in Mangalore, we had a very enthusiastic and tech-driven state task force chairman who for tuberculosis. So who was intent on bringing this artificial intelligence to trying to detect tuberculosis. They were setting up some program, and briefly we used to hear some updates from them, but I'm not sure what happened afterwards. But then when I joined AIIMS, all was going smooth, of course, until we had the. So I joined in 2018, and then 1.5 years down the line, we had pandemic staring down at us, and that was the time when truly I started to feel that uh, this this practice of exclusion of healthcare from was not going to work, because there was no data that we had for COVID-19. So everything was being collected at multiple places, was being shared, was being analyzed, and we had our department, especially at AIIMS Jodhpur, was I think probably I was very fortunate to be at the right place at the right time. Even like just it was like some 2 or 3 months down the line. I remember Dr. Naveen, that we tried getting data from ICMR for looking at. We're trying to see if we can get data from somewhere to see if we can do something that can change or at least contribute to shaping of the response. And it was during that time that with Dr. Nishant, we had started the work for the rose images in eBus that we used to do. But eventually, I think that was a very productive time that I spent at AIIMS Jodhpur, and it was kind of, I think it was unique in that the amount of I don't think that kind of academic uh, freedom that to publish and to do research is probably something that I'm very proud of for my stint there. And so that's where it all started. And initially I was taking artificial intelligence as my research interest. We had done a couple of 3 or 4 papers while I was there, but then it soon blossomed into a full-time career. So now that I've been working in Bangalore for almost a year, and I had the good fortune of working with almost 3 startups, and I also with the opportunity provided by AIIMS Jodhpur and Indo Swedish consortium. We could do. We tried some. We are also dabbling with something of our own. So all these things, I'll probably, uh, because this is such a vast topic. We have innovation in healthcare is extremely vast. It's like an ocean. So I won't say that there is one or two good uh, ways of going about it. I'm sure there are infinite ways of going in any direction wherever we see a problem. But while I was associated with some sort of a tech based problem solving approach, so for most of the examples that I'll be discussing in this talk would be those where I have personally worked and contributed to its development. uh, but there would be many areas, of course, where I would probably not venture, and there would be probably more qualified people to talk on those. So, so regarding innovation, so what I found in working in this space, especially in Bangalore, because that's considered the hub of. Of course, there are now multiple hubs, but still it retains its. I mean, there are certain streets where you walk and you bump into a random person, and that random person could be a co-founder of something, or at least trying to get into some space that was not earlier touched by anyone else. So it is a very common thing, and because I worked with very enthusiastic entrepreneurs who actually got the idea, developed the idea, scaled it, and so some of those experiences will be coming directly from those things. So what is say also about the talk that we have with business people, cross domain, cross functional talks that we have. One thing was quite apparent, right? One thing was very apparent in all these interactions that I had, and I had a faint tinge about that earlier on also. But one thing was that we everyone is talking about an impending disruption. Everyone is expecting an impending disruption in healthcare. Disruption in this in a positive sense, like we had a disruption in the financial markets where people could actually participate in financial markets from their mobile phones without much process. We had disruption in telecom sector where people can boast of uh, very good internet connection. We had disruption in mobile phones. We had disruption in cameras. We had disruption in pretty much every space that we have seen. But one place which is conspicuous by its absence was probably healthcare. In that, we didn't see a drastic revolutionary change in the way people access healthcare, and that's the reason why and most people in the industry feel that a disruption is imminent. But it could also be a testament to the complexity of healthcare, that you can't there is no one magic bullet that can turn around this whole thing. So there could be, but like recently we were hearing a talk from the Janssen chief product officer. She was saying that in the future, like in the coming few years, we'll have one third of the world's data, as in the recorded data, would be coming from healthcare. And that would be the area where most of the behemoths would be getting involved to try to get a pie of that. So I have no doubts that a disruption is imminent. It's only a matter of time and probably a matter of by who. So, so we'll get into the nitty gritty of some of the entrepreneurial things that are going on. So probably we could take some ideas from those things, and probably my intent would be to stimulate some of that thinking, so that if somebody could take that forward and and convert it into a full scale business or whatever. So there are a few things that probably I'll be coming to. And uh, uh, and and uh, another important, which is quite relevant to our life, is that India is considered to be a major destination for businesses, and also the source for manpower, because that's how the industry is looking at. Like, you for the cost of for the cost of producing and getting a doctor or a software engineer in the United States, it would cost one third or one fourth probably, for the same standard of living to live in this country. So many of these companies are looking towards uh, Southeast Asia in general for tapping this market, and probably in Southeast Asia, probably the biggest and the freest market is India. So a chunk of that business is surely coming here. And companies are increasingly collaborating with Indian professionals, both for their knowledge as well as for the fact that they want to have a foothold in this country also. So it is probably exciting times going forward, and there is probably no better time to get into innovation. And for the students, probably what I would say is that my experiences when we were hiring uh, 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 for doctors to for some of the projects that we were doing, is that it's always good to be thorough in your clinical knowledge. Of course, that's probably the calling. That's why everyone is preparing to become one. But at the same time, I think it might be useful to slightly diversify and have some knowledge of some domain, be it business, or I would recommend strongly some sort of computer science, especially languages that go to make these. Because if you're not going to, in the future, you're not going to escape interacting with with the digital world. Like, that's for sure. It's coming. It's just that uh, you might be in the driver's seat if you happen to know some stuff from the other domain. But irrespective of that, you are going to 5 or 10 years down the line, you will face products that would require you to have an understanding of the digital things that underpin those recordings or instruments. So it's surely in coming. So I would recommend that it might be worthwhile to slightly diversify in addition to your. And that's why probably I'm very happy that AIIMS Jodhpur, I think, has a lot more. I mean, apart from this, there are just so many initiatives, and I've seen different places, and I feel the dedication that the academic section has for academic advancement of students here, including setting up the Institute Innovation Council, uh, or getting the Indo-Swedish consortium. All these are all very promising pointers, and I'm sure you all would be appreciating how important these things will be when down the line you're going to face and probably solve some of these problems. Okay, so with that, I would go on to the main course. That is, so when I see innovation, actually there must be like many categories that you could bucket them into. But I think the major ones would be associated with the core clinical services, like the ones that AIIMS Jodhpur itself is offering, treating thousands of patients and providing ICU beds, providing laboratory services, tertiaries, quaternary referrals, and everything. So that would be an area, of course, like where innovation is happening in adding beds to hospitals, networking hospitals, etc. There are innovations that probably in the next bucket would be something like optimizing patient care, where there are lots of innovations that where people are linking electronic health records from different hospitals. Uh, People are getting wide variety and choice when it comes to which healthcare service they should get into. There are places where they have innovated to get a chain of laboratories where you do a lot of tests at a very minimal cost, but when you scale it up into like tens of thousands of patients, you start getting incredible profits there, at the same time helping reduce the cost of healthcare and all that. So all of the so these two categories, but overall to me, right, to me at least, at the way I see the ROI, etc., it looks a little more capital intensive, and there are it requires a huge amount of conviction and dedication to expand on these. And I think the doctors that are graduating every year, are some of them go on to do just these kind of things. So that's there. But there is one very, I would call it as the low hanging fruit. The low hanging fruit in innovation comes from integrating technology with healthcare. There are several such low hanging fruits that entrepreneurs are going after, and they are reaping fantastic benefits out of it. So, amongst these tech-based innovations that are occurring, there is. It's almost 1 year now that I have been working with artificial intelligence, but even then, I feel that personally, probably that I am still late to the party. In that, probably the better time would have been like 2015, 16, whatever. But still, I feel that jumping it into 2021 is already a late entry, and it's progressing at such a pace that it's very difficult to keep pace with it. But still, all said and done, it has probably the single most disruptive element that can come into not just healthcare but any sector in the world would be the AI. And I say it with full responsibility, because I'll just give you an anecdotal thing to explain why I say that with that great responsibility. Is, for example, like we were working on categorizing hypertrophic cardiomyopathy from the normal ECGs. So while working at it, so we had almost approximately some 30,000 ECGs of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients, and probably 1.5 lakh patients ECGs with the normal ones. So if we were to ask a person, right, if we were to ask a physician to go through each ECG and compare with the 1,50,000 ECGs, compare each ECG of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy with that of the normal, it would probably take a few weeks. I'm sure, even if the person were to work at a humongous rate. But the end of it, probably that person is going to learn uh, how what are the patterns, how does a ECG with HCM is going to look like. And if you were to then give that person say 100 ECGs, it is likely that person is going to correctly categorize 90% of those ECGs as belonging to or to the correct group, whether they were HCM and non-HCM. But this same process, right, without involving humans, and it could be possible that despite that training, it could be possible that the human could still not detect a pattern. That's very much possible. But when we look at the AI to do the same job, it will probably take 4 to 5 hours at max to go through each multiple times, hundreds of times, and then make all calculations like what's the distance of the peak of P wave from the QRS wave. And the surprising thing is we don't even need to tell it what to look for. We don't tell. That's why it's called intelligence. So it has the intelligence to know where to look, and it does it by going through it hundreds of times and trying to learn things, then apply it on some its internal validation set, and starts to compare its performance, and then it keeps on iterating. It gets better, so much so that we are able to achieve 92 to 95% accuracy when we are using those algorithms alone. So now imagine if all that human hours that were spent and all the amount and resources that were, if we were to do it as humans, and the same job could be done in a matter of few hours for maybe 3 to 4 thousand rupees of computing power, and which also is like every coming day it's going down and down because just people are using it that much more. So even the cost of computing is coming down a lot these days. So and more algorithms are coming open source, like free for use by people. So there cannot be a comparison. And then we are talking not only about HCM, we are just talking about thousands of other things where we can apply these things. So that's why I think that AI, we are training masters. We are training masters of things. Like people can spend their lifetime trying to figure out how a cardiac amyloidosis ECG would look like, but the algorithms can just do it in a matter of hours, and we can make it for every other thing. And that's why I don't think the future we can even imagine without AI being there. And when I talk about AI and innovation, there are certain areas, like it's just not random run of a mill thing. There are certain areas in which innovations are happening, which I probably get into now. So those tech innovations that I'm talking about are occurring in the following domains. We have text-based things where companies are leveraging the power of AI on text. I'll tell you and that should probably give you ideas on how you could probably incorporate it if you would want to do that. Then we have based on images, be it CT or pathology images or any other image that you can think of. Then we have the sound-based ones. In fact, one of the projects that we are doing with Dr. Naveen, that we were looking at the sound-based application. And the fourth one would be something called the structured data. So structured data. When I say structured data, it might is a common term around in the AI companies. But what essentially it means is we want to differentiate it from the text data, which is unstructured, because there's no structure, there are no columns, there are no objective way to assess the unstructured text. For the structured data, we have definite, and I'll tell you how incredibly useful that simple structured data can be. So I'll come to specific examples in my course. So starting with the, and I'll try to tie up how each idea can be scaled to business. So for example, I'll start with the first projects that we started to do was to identify pulmonary hypertension from ECGs. So because we know that, so we knew the problem. The problem was that right heart catheterization is not easily accessible, and echocardiography is a very resource intensive thing, and there are lots of deserving patients who require an echo, and the manpower that is required for all that thing would be it's already consumed in doing the routine work. I don't think screening echoes on mass level are probably going to work out. So we knew these problems, and we also knew that there must be some signs, and there are, and we know it from our literature review, that pulmonary hypertension would manifest much like maybe like months before it actually is brought to the attention of the healthcare providers. We knew that ECGs would be an important source of that information. So we the first thing that we did was we floated this proposal, because every business requires some sort of resources to work on. So you ought to have some stream of funding that will go through. So there are, like we know, for pulmonary hypertension, there are lots of drugs in the market, and those drugs are quite niche. And I'm talking about markets in the West, where still the generic medications are not yet that prevalent. So there is a very there are great rewards for the pharmaceutical sector for dispensing those, while at the same time there are great rewards for patients to be diagnosed early on and not having to wait for years before they develop some complication and all that. So it was a win-win situation, and we tied up with one such pharmaceutical which funded the whole thing, and we got an algorithm with which was just like 2 weeks back was given the breakthrough designation, that it's a breakthrough development by the FDA. So that's the ultimate authority that in the West for any such introductions. So we knew there was an idea, and we knew there were companies that would be interested in. We knew that there would be patients who would be interested in, and you're probably going to use the manpower of those companies to distribute it, because there are only certain number of things that one can do. Only a limited thing, and then you need to collaborate to increase your reach. So that was an idea that has turned into a business. Probably down the line in a year or two, once sufficient clinical validation trials are done, you would probably see it in the market, and all you need to do then would be just give the raw data from the ECG. In fact, they are building components that you can integrate with the ECG, and you don't even need to do something. It will just automatically predict whether pulmonary hypertension is present or not. And all that requires is a referral to the doctor for further evaluation. So that's how the idea translates into a business. Then we had we knew about this problem of atrial fibrillation, for example. So atrial fibrillation, it can so many patients with stroke probably never know they had AFib that probably led to it. So we knew there was a problem, and we also know that our ECG machines are quite good at picking AFib. They themselves give those recommendations that there is an AFib going on. Now, so where would we find space if we were to do some sort of business? Because it's a common problem, and there is a scope for that, and there are benefits for patients. You could probably in patients who would require anticoagulation, probably we can preempt the strokes that occur by giving them anticoagulation timely. Maybe all those things are possible, but where's the business? Because there is this Apple Watch that already gives you atrial fibrillation as a diagnosis. So to compete in that arena would probably not be a good thing. So based on that, a lot of brainstorming, then we figured that there is still a market for predicting atrial fibrillation early on, right, before atrial fibrillation occurs. So that was the idea that was developed, and we went about it. We collected thousands of, I think some 2 lakh ECGs with atrial fibrillation, and a control of maybe 1:5 or something. And we used AI to look into those ECGs that were deemed normal, like there were normal ECGs before, but these patients went on to develop atrial fibrillation in a certain time period. So just based on that, we were totally in for a surprise when it had an AUC, area under the curve, of around 0.9, and we had a very good sensitivity and specificity both in their late 80s. So based on the normal ECG itself, we were able to figure out that this patient must be at risk of developing atrial fibrillation. So there are some signals that are there in the ECG that are not yet fully analyzed, and we don't know based on human assessment whether those are significant. They may not be even apparent. It could be anything. It could just be the relative heights of R wave in each of those leads. We don't know what it is. For most of the part, it's usually a black box that occurs, but because we have just so much data and we have got such powerful algorithms that screen through the ECG like anything, it reduces it to threads and rejoins them. So what we and then that algorithm, actually, when we took to the community, and we had to find so again, right, because if you are into innovation and you want to scale it up, you have to get collaboration. We got one from we reached out to a company that does this monitoring, long-term monitoring for ECGs. So they were interested to find out, like, if in this long-term monitoring, they indeed find that there is atrial fibrillation going on in the patients that we flag might go on to develop atrial fibrillation. That would be a real coup. So we got that partnership done, and we ran it through, and we were in for we are in for great results even there. Like, we are seeing that they are 5 times more likely when we flag it that the patients might have atrial fibrillation compared to when we say they might not have. when you do a 30-day monitoring of those patients. So this was another where we took the idea, modified the idea, found a business partner, and we delivered that. Then there is another problem. For example, the hypertrophy cardiomyopathy that I was saying. Because this problem, we had to find, like, we knew that there are lots of people who might be having undiagnosed HCM because they may never have got an echo in their lives to know what's their interventricular septal thickness. So there was a problem, and then we know of lots of these celebrities in the sports, and then there are so many unnamed sports person probably, or even normal people who never get this diagnosis and have a sudden cardiac death. So we knew there was a problem, and we knew there had to be a solution. And again, we had to find a partner that would probably benefit from this win-win situation. And I think we found one where there was a drug called mavacamten that is now going to come up, and they would need these kind of algorithms for them to identify which patients are going to be having HCM, and then they can do their trials on these. So again, that's an example of how we can take an idea, pair it with a viable business model, and then take it forward. Then I'll come to the pathology section. That's another area that's under tremendous change. So to begin with, the first thing that the pathology problem solving required was digitization of slides. So we know there are like hundreds of thousands of slides available in many academic medical centers, but those slides are all in silos, and hardly ever one would make the trouble of going into the repository and collecting a slide and having a look at that. So that's a painful process, and that's never going to be a sustainable way of doing things. So digitization was one thing where the people I worked with, we developed the scanners which look at slides with multiple depths at multiple levels, almost like a Google Earth kind of a thing, where you can actually keep on zooming in. And then there are lots of challenges there. For example, like there is a lot of competition even in that area. Like there are lots of companies that are doing. So when it comes to innovation, the important lesson that we learned there was there is a first mover advantage. Like whoever went in first gets the largest pie. But if you already have competition, then it makes more sense to differentiate from the competition. So when you do a competitive market intelligence, you study your competition, because that's an essential part of the whole process, that you need to keep your competition closer. So you need to get to know, and when you do those kind of things, you realize that we realize that the time it takes for the top 2 or 3 to do a digitization of slides, which, for example, broken cover slips or dirt, that some of the old slides might have dirt, and the cover slip is broken, and that is somehow causing an uneven refraction using a microscope. So if you focus on a certain area, you will lose the other area. So they had to come up with solutions, and that involved a lot of image processing. And what they did was they just took multiple areas at different levels and just stitched them together to make it appear like it's all a single slide, not at different refractions, but at the same refraction. So that kind of thing actually enabled them to get a big contract for doing these kind of digitization, and they also had to differentiate in terms of the process. Otherwise, the time it used to take was very long. Nobody was going to wait for that long to do this. So we did it like in 4 to 5 minutes when the competition was doing it in 30 minutes for the broken ones. And again, the time was similar for the normal ones, except the factor was a little different. And again, the other innovations that are going on there is identification of a disease, whether it's a certain cancer, the cells you're looking at are cancerous or non-cancerous. Now, that might be like, okay, that even a human being can do. Yes, of course, they can do. But when you have many slides, then it makes sense to actually have the AI mark the areas which are important to be screened, and then it would save a lot of time looking at just those areas to confirm. And again, we have to differentiate from what the industry already provides. So we had to pair it with data from the IHC markers, and it had to automatically even tell us, like, if this is this cancer, then you also need to tell, the algorithm needs to tell what IHC markers to apply. So it cuts down the time for thinking that probably the pathologist might have to go through, and so on and so forth. So these are like some of the innovations that are happening in that place. And gene sequencing, that's probably the next upcoming thing, where there are lots of industries vying to do the sequencing, especially in patients with cancer, because they would want to know which targeted therapy is going to work. Excuse me, there's just a sound here. One moment. We are just next to the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, so there would be flying lots of these planes around. And coming to the structured data, I think this is something that is very interesting. I mean, people would be knowing about the image-based ones, about the pathology-based ones, but this structured data is something that was a revelation for me. Um, for for example, I'll just give you what we could accomplish from doing the looking at the structured data. The structured data means this: patient's age, gender, when was the first time patient came to the hospital, when was a patient admitted, what are dates patient came to the OPD, what are the ICD codes that were assigned for these patients, what were the tests that were ordered for these patients, what was the treatment that was given, like whether Lasix was prescribed or whether torsemide was prescribed, whatever it be, PPIs, all those things. And you have other structured data like the procedures that were performed for the patients, like whether endoscopy was performed or whether some physiotherapy was performed. All of those things go on to constitute what we call the structured data. And it was a revelation of sorts when so sometimes there are academic centers that actually they actually come up with problems that the industry solves. So and that's one interesting thing that I found, that probably sooner than later we would also probably catch up on that, is the fact that and that's what I see AIIMS Jodhpur already doing, that is tying up with the industry, collaborating with them to it's a two-way process. The companies, they gain from the data and other facilities that are given, and the there are investments made by the medical centers into those small companies. And that's the reason why many of these academic centers don't don't collaborate with giants like Google or Amazon or Microsoft for that matter, because the return on investment is not great. Like if you enter into a relationship with a startup and you invest and get a stake of 5 to 10% from that company, and you give all the required stuff to them to develop those solutions, and those companies bring in their expertise and help you solve your problem. And once this process starts going, and then the valuation of that startup starts going up, and then the amount of returns that you can get from companies like that would probably never be able for the big companies that are already quite stable. So it doesn't make much of a dent there, but the kind of returns. So they are quite interested in getting into these kind of relationships, especially the US universities, medical centers. They are all doing this sort of thing. Maybe this culture will soon catch up in other places as well. So one of those approach for this problem, right? They were having this sponge on string. So they had made a device where they would just, like a capsule, is just swallow it and take out the whole thing out, the thread. Like there was a brush that is attached to the end, and you get those cells, and you analyze those cells, and you can predict which of those patients have Barrett's esophagus, or they have esophageal adenocarcinoma, or any other of those things. So now so once you develop such devices, the cost of doing, so that's another opportunity for innovations. Right? The cost of doing trials is very high in the United States. So many of these companies are spent coming to India to do some of those, and but the ones that were already doing over there, they need to cut down on the cost. So they need to identify patients early on who are likely to develop these conditions, and that's where the structured data comes into account. So they approach us to try to help them with trying to predict which patients they should do this test on, so that there is a return for money. Like they also want to show that doing this test will actually help you diagnose cancers. And if your prevalence is something like 1 in 10,000, then if you're doing it on 10,000 and just show one patient, that's not unlikely to get a very good reception from the audience. So they would want to prove something like we did it in 50 patients and we detected one cancer. So what we did was, like, we took all that data. So what we figured was that AI would be able to find out some patterns, and it indeed was. So the AI algorithm, ultimately, when we look back into what it actually learned, we figured that it was learning that when patient receives lots of PPIs, patients seek something like pylori infection, or patient is a smoker. So it was making use of all this information, including information of how many times the patient visited which department and everything. And it was like, it also identified that stress was probably one more thing for GERD. So it was picking up on psychiatry department visits to know that. And it was also picking up on education itself. Like the higher you are educated, more likely you are to get stress and possibly GERD. So all those things, it was making this huge, we gave it a huge database, and it was just able to figure out on its own which patients. And that was recently presented in the DDW. That's one of the very famous conferences in the United States. We presented that data, and what we were doing we went one step ahead just to differentiate ourselves from the competition. We were giving it data from 1 year before the development of cancer. So if the patient developed cancer in 2015, we would just train the algorithm on data which is 2014 and backwards. So our hypothesis was that there would be sufficient signatures at least 1 year in advance before the patient actually is diagnosed with cancer, esophageal adenocarcinoma to be precise. So, this was an unexpected use of structured, and then there was another very unusual use. So we had another uh, 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 principal investigator who was interested, uh, who was also doing a lot of work on cardiac amyloidosis, and they also want to cut down on the number of patients that they should study to detect one cardiac amyloidosis. So again, it's not feasible to do a mass screening on that. Like any test you apply on like mass level, it will be incredibly costly. So we had to come up with a solution, and that's when we brainstormed and figured that there is a certain presentation for amyloidosis. For example, when we read through a lot of those patient notes, we figured that patients are usually diagnosed a little late. There would be multiple changes, like there would be carpal tunnel syndrome going on. Maybe there is pericardial effusion, there is pleural effusion, there is ascites, there is nephropathy, there is proteinuria, there are AV blocks that are going on. And when somebody actually takes a biopsy and then somebody figures that it could be related to amyloidosis, then they eventually get a diagnosis, maybe especially when patient might already be in heart failure by that time. So we figured that this structured data could actually give us that kind of a presentation. So we can know when there is an unusual increase in these coexisting things. For example, pleural effusion, pericardial effusion, ascites, and nephropathy, and AV block. Some of these things happening in tandem will probably flag us that this patient could be having a systemic disease, and in fact we are providing even the kappa lambda ratios, everything that is basically that is structured, which is like in a column kind of a data. And we are still at it, and we saw encouraging results in trying to identify those kind of patients. So I mean, this structured data, which probably we also have lots of data on patients with their blood tests, their reports, and so on. So probably that's a very strong. And then the other innovations that are going on in this area is with regards to the insurance companies. Like, so the insurance companies want to know which of their patients are likely to make claims and those kind of stuff. But of course, it's a taboo in the medical industry to be helping insurance people with this, because a lot of times the insurance companies actually use it to profile patients based on their race, ethnicity, and those kind of things. So it's a little touchy thing. That's why none of the major people want to work with that, and that's probably an area that innovators could look into. And of course, the work that we were doing as part of that Indo-Swedish consortium was trying to figure if we could get the sound of the cough to help us predict a variety of diseases. So that work is going on, but it just shows you that data anywhere, in any form, can be leveraged to solve those problems. But then, after having said all this, there are certain pitfalls that I should probably. It's an important thing for someone who is getting into innovation. There is one absolute rule that they should keep in mind whenever they are doing this, because it's such a make or break thing. It's patient privacy. So anyone going into any sort of medical innovation, uh, healthcare privacy is extremely sensitive area, and uh, it's literally a make or break. And if it was found that somebody was selling patient data, maybe the regulations are not that strong here, but if you are dealing with any Western clients and there is even a whiff of data loss, and it could not be just your fault, really. Sometimes you might have kept it in unsafe devices, like you left it in a pen drive and you lost your pen drive, or you kept it in your computer, but your computer was hacked by someone and you lost it. Doesn't matter, whatever the source, whatever happened. But if it was from you, then it's very likely that not be allowed further access to any healthcare data, and it can even lead to prosecution. So one thing I would tell all prospective innovators working with healthcare data, that safety of that data is paramount. That's why there are many who don't even allow uh, identifiers, like even the ages are changed. I mean, patient the data has to go a de-identification, like the x-ray should not have the name of the doctor or the patient, the CT scan shouldn't have any identifier that can lead back to the patient. Even the names of doctors in the clinical history would be replaced by some imaginary names. The dates would be shifted, and sometimes even the ages will be changed. For example, if there is a 110-year-old patient, then we know that there is only one patient in the hospital. Then we can as well identify who that patient was. So you have to like take care of masking all that, and that's probably one thing that at every stage in the work that should be taken care of. There is absolutely no chance for any theft or loss or deliberate release of patient information. So that's one thing I would ask everyone, whoever is venturing into this, to keep in mind. And there are other relatively less important things. Probably these might gain importance even in India as we go forward, because there's just so much diversity that we have in the country, and the same holds good for the Western, especially the United States. So what happens is when we go to the FDA has a so one of the things that we learned over time and learned it a hard way is that you whenever any algorithm, any device that comes into the thing market, before it has to be equitable, right? So it cannot be that it's doing poorly on African Americans, or it's doing poorly on the white Americans, or any ethnic race, maybe Mexican, Latinos, Hispanics. It should be working on all of them properly, and it's our responsibility. And in fact, when you're making, if you're going down that route of doing innovations, then probably it's important to keep these things in mind before you start the project, than do it as an afterthought, because doing it backwards is incredibly difficult. So if you already have a bias towards one or the other race, or ethnicity or gender or age groups, then to rectify it then backwards is an incredibly difficult problem. So if you're venturing into any of those things, then you should plan all of this beforehand, just to save lots of heartache later. And um, yeah, so those are the important things. And so there are other domains, like whenever somebody is innovating, you're probably required to collaborate with lots of people, especially people from different background than yours. Maybe you will need to collaborate with the finance personnel to manage all things, and to keep the regulatory things in mind, right? You should be absolutely sure of what regulations are there in the country that you're going to apply your algorithms on, so that you satisfy all local laws, because healthcare is a very sensitive topic, and that's probably why not many players are very happy to enter this area, and that's why probably it has like escaped the kind of disruption that is there in other places, because there are just so many regulations. You need to follow the law of the land. Whenever you're planning to do something, you might need the human resource people to be there from the beginning, because you don't want any toxic work culture to get into your thing, and then and then take the whole company down someday because of some behavior by one or two of your colleagues or whoever it is. So those kind of collaborations would be needed. They would probably need a product officer, like one who has a very good handle on technology, who understands all these integrations and making of user interface, back end, all of these things. So it would definitely be it would be a collaborative job. So not think you can do it alone. Any of these things, mostly these things, can't be done alone. So you'll need to collaborate with people. And from what I have seen, the entrepreneur's job is probably the most difficult job in the world. Despite all the glamour that you see when it succeeds, is totally different from the lows that the entrepreneur experiences, especially now. From all these past 2 to 3 years of a lot of liquidity was injected into the system. The valuations were going sky high. Companies were making a lot of money. There was a lot of funding that was available. People were raising left, right, and center, and all sorts of things were going on. But now, this current scenario, lots of tech companies that I know of are holding on hiring. They are cutting cost. Layoffs have started, because the entrepreneur's job is to keep the dream intact. So to keep the dream intact, sometimes those kind of cost cutting will come. So those are the low days, right? So it's not always rosy. It can be incredibly tough, all these decisions. So it's not definitely even a normal job. It's surely the most difficult job, and that's why when it succeeds, there is that kind of attention that they get. But so these are some of the facets of tech-based innovations that are going on, and many of these which I have narrated have been part of those things, and there are just so many new exciting things coming up. There are there are like incredible advances that have happened in understanding natural language. Today, people are building bots that can talk like human beings. There is even a talk of getting an echo based on ECG, getting an echo image based on ECG. That's the kind of cutting edge research that's going on, and you will hear all of these things coming to life in the maybe 1 or 2 years at max. That we are that close to all these major breakthroughs. ECGs especially will be totally revolutionized, right? No more depend on the the addition of R and the S in the V1, V6 to get LVH and all that. We have a low ejection fraction algorithm that was tested in was given approval by the FDA to do clinical trial. We looked at 5 different centers in the United States. All of them gave us more than 80% sensitivity and specificity. That was a cutoff set by FDA, and that is soon coming into the market. We don't know how it makes those predictions, but it does, and it could be those R plus S wave. We don't know what all it does in addition to all of those, but it makes incredible diagnoses. So the landscape is going to change. We just have to probably keep pace with it. So I yield the floor at this point. I'd be happy if there are any questions. Been a long monologue from my side.
So participants can ask any question, practical issues.
Sir, I have a question. Regarding machine learning, how do you think how difficult it is for doctor, somebody not having a very strong background of mathematics or coding, to start with machine learning and gain some requisite skill in this area? What is your take on this matter, please?
Yeah. So I, in fact, I am that example where I took that up, and I didn't find it that challenging. Like, because for one, doctors are probably the cream of most of the selections that happen, and having dealt with like so many subjects and so many intricacies, compared to all that, I would think that machine learning, except for being from a different a little unusual area, it's not very difficult to get hold of. I think a month or two is max what would require to gain requisite skills to do so start with the data that we already have, that you can start analyzing. But I think not more than that, and it's very, very doable. So it's just I think it's apart from the. I think the problem that occurs is that you see all these computer scientists posting their papers on machine learning, and when you read those papers, then this is very natural to get intimidated. I think that's where it comes from, uh, because it's their bread and butter. So they have to be like extremely, extremely good at it, and they do lots of fancy stuff. That's what I've seen. They do that, but what I feel is for academic medical centers, we don't deal with data that goes into like millions of rows. Right? We don't deal with data that big in academic medical centers. Compared to when you're doing a commercial project, sometimes we deal with 8 million ECGs at one go. So that's where probably you will need that kind of optimization and large scale machine learning models to do it at scale and do it parallelly, reduce the computing time, save cost for the project and all that, require this thing. But for the medical centers where we have data for patients amounting to 400 or 500 rows, maybe 40, 50, 60 columns, you don't require that kind of complicated things to run. For such data sets, even the simplest of machine learning algorithms, which should be easily learnable and masterable, should do the thing. But yeah, I can totally get it where the question probably would have stemmed. Even in fact, when I used to read papers, used to find things like uh, gradient descent and XG boost, tree-based random splits, and all that. Look at that through that lens. It used to look very intimidating, but most often it is the simplest of algorithms that are easily learnable that can do the job. So I would definitely urge whoever is interested to go for it. This is not a very this is not something that is not doable by doctors.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Excellent presentation, Shahir.
Thank you, sir.
Uh, so I just want to ask your opinion. Do you think if uh, the medical student they are taught maybe some component of AI or given a basic knowledge of AI, so will that help shape their career in AI if they want to develop later on?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Like, I mean, the only thing holding back AI applications in healthcare is probably healthcare professionals with knowledge of AI. Uh, that's a limiting factor. So I think removing that limitation factor would probably go a long way in doing just that. So it's an absolutely important point that you raised.
Thanks, sir.
In fact, sir, when recently we were trying to hire doctors who were graduating from different universities uh, to do some projects that required not not a very high level of information. We just needed some categorization problems. They just needed to apply simple machine learning things to do a set of experiments where you can predict from a given sentence whether that word in a sentence is referring to a pathology, is it referring to an organ, or is it referring to a medication, those kind of things. But we struggled a lot before we could find people like that. So that's probably could be an important. It would probably make them on a different, like they'll just expand their career options. Mostly that's what that kind of education might do.
Yes, Shahir. So the people who have to leave their medical profession or clinical, because among the medical students, there is a charm of the post graduation in the clinical subjects. and what it feels like that if they have to leave for a medtech program, or they become innovators, the clinical innovators. So what is the life of the people like this? It depends on what are the characteristics of these people who chose this avenue rather than
Yes.
being for a like most traveled path.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, what AIIMS is probably producing one of the finest, of course, like clinicians, and that kind of service cannot be replaced by any tech based intervention, or at least not in the foreseeable future. So the need for the hardcore clinical services will be there for a long time to come. No tech or AI is, it's only going to make their life easier. It's not going to replace any doctors. Doctors would still be required. There would still be some people who would want to get into an innovator club, probably. And as sir mentioned, it's probably part of their personality that they want to do that. They are probably they probably find, because much of my work nowadays involves looking at vectors, right? So matrices. So you have to make those kind of calculations, and you have to read up on how you can represent vectors in the best way possible. You have to do lots of mathematical manipulation, statistical work that needs to be done. So only if somebody who finds it interesting to do that kind of work, of course those are the people who are going to try to get into this. But there is, I think there is still one unsettled thing that I am probably yet my view is still shaping on that, whether it is appropriate to do it immediately after the MBBS, or should they go for post graduation and then probably pivot towards this view is still shaping. But one of the initial things that is quite apparent is the depth of domain knowledge that is required. So unless somebody somebody is thinking going post grad, I mean immediately after their MBBS, if they have sufficient exposure to the healthcare system, it might allow them to make more meaningful contributions to the thing. Because, like, we are all aware that MBBS involves 4.5 years of uh, 4.5 years of lots of study, and then 1 year of internship where you rotate through different departments. But still, to imbibe the spirit of the healthcare and truly start making those recommendations. For example, let's just tell, like, we were working on, we are making an algorithm to predict hyperkalemia from ECGs. So there are these lots of chronic kidney disease patients and heart failure patients who develop cardiac arrest due to hyperkalemia. So we were trying to build an algorithm, but in the process of that algorithm, we were seeing some problems that were occurring. So we tried to figure what it was. Then so we tried to brainstorm, and then we realized that uh, there were these there were some patients who were receiving potassium infusions while the potassium test is showing to be hyperkalemia. So unless somebody has worked in the ICUs and have actually seen how samples are collected, how the infusions happen, and how sometimes those infusions can be contaminated and lead to pseudo hyperkalemia. So only then they would be able to add some value to the system. So I mean, interested candidates can always pivot at any level. But it's still an evolving opinion and view whether it is good to have sufficient exposure to the healthcare sector before jumping into the tech, because once you're in tech you are expected to give all sorts of inputs. So it's like you are the person who guides development of the algorithm. You are the one who decides what inclusion criteria goes to include the patient, what exclusion is there. So it requires a bit of thorough understanding of the healthcare to do that. So so that's my personal feel. But yes, there are other things like where these post MBBS I'm seeing some of those are actually very good at fabricating devices, circuits, and they are working at making processes autonomous. Those kind of things where it requires more of the theoretical and the machine processes, then probably it would make sense. But if you're going into clinical AI development, it's better to have a good exposure to the healthcare, and then you apply those learnings uh, uh, to the clinical side, to the machine learning side to make it better. So it's just it's still an evolving thing from my side. I'll probably hope and learn as I go future, work with more people to understand how it's helping them. For me, for sure, it was my exposure that helps me a lot to debug. It doesn't take too much time to figure out what's going wrong, because just by virtue of having seen those kind of things, whether it is applicable to others is still a thing that I'm learning. Sometimes they are. Sometimes I don't see that as much of a requirement, in that everything else can be learned for the problem. Like whatever the problem you're attempting, you can learn a lot of things and then just apply that knowledge. It's very rare, and sometimes that you actually require that nuances that are not mentioned in the textbooks but only come from your experience. So it's kind of 50-50 at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Shahir. And we are also grateful to all the participants. Uh, they have listened to talk, and you have discussed many aspects from the clinician point of view. So on behalf of AIIMS Jodhpur, we again thank you. And I request that we'll keep in touch with you. And if any questions is there, it can be posted to you. But I request all the participants to please fill the form which is there on the chat box. And because on based on that, we'll provide the e-certificate.
Thank you very much, sir. And I'm grateful for you and the whole team for organizing this. And I see a glorious future for AIIMS Jodhpur based on the kind of activities that I'm seeing that's happening there. Thank you all for your for coming over. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shahir, and all the participants.